Alright, today we're going to be learning solving quadratic equations by completing the square. Okay, we already know how to solve by factoring, and here's another way that we can solve, and that's called completing the square. So our objective for today is to be able to complete the square in order to write perfect square trinomials and to solve the quadratic equations by completing the square. So let's go ahead and get started looking at example 1. So the first thing we're going to do, as you remember, whenever we were factoring, we wanted to set it equal to 0. But on completing the square, the first thing we want to do is get rid of this c value. Okay, so we want to get rid of that plus 12. The first thing that we do to get rid of that is, because it's a plus 12, we're going to subtract 12 on both sides. Okay, so then that would give me x squared minus 6x plus, and then remember from class today, it's going to be plus a blank there, equals, and then 19 minus 12 gives us 7. And we're going to add something over here, because if we add something on the left side, we have to add something on the right side in order for it to stay balanced. So now we're going to complete the square. So remember, in order to do that, we take the b term, we divide it by 2, and then we square it. So our b term here is this negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 gives us negative 3, and then square it, that gives us 9. So if we add 9 on the left side, we also need to add 9 on the right side. So now over on the left side, I've got a perfect square trinomial. So that means whenever I factor it, those two numbers that multiply to give me 9 and add to give me negative 6 are the same two numbers, and that's going to be x minus 3, x minus 3. But since they're the same, all I have to do is just write it once, but put the square right there. And then 7 plus the 9 gives me 16. So now we're trying to get this x all by itself, so we want to get rid of that square sign. The inverse of squaring is square rooting. So we need to square root the left and square root the right side. So now whenever we square root, that's going to get rid of the square, and we're going to be left with x minus 3 on the left. And then on the right, make sure you get the positive and the negative. Square root of 16 is 4. So now, like I said, we're trying to get that x all by itself. So we're going to add 3 to both sides. Those are going to cancel out, and I've got x equals, and then understand here I've got two problems. I've got 4 plus 3, which is 7, and then I also have negative 4 plus 3. Negative 4 plus 3 gives us negative 1. So now in our braces we've got 7, negative 1. And those are our solutions. Now, could you have solved this by factoring? Yes, you could have set it equal to 0 and then factored. That could have been done on this and was probably easier. Okay, but not all of them can you do by factoring. So let's look at the next one, example 2. First thing we're going to do here is get rid of our c values. So I'm going to subtract 21 on both sides. Those are going to cancel out, and I get x squared plus 3x. Remember, I'm going to have a new c value, so I'm going to put plus blank equals, and then 22 minus 21 gives us 1, but plus blank. All right, so now remember, you're going to take that b term, b divided by 2, and then you're going to square it. So we're going to take that 3 divided by 2 and then square. And it's okay for you to use your calculator on this. So 3 divided by 2 gives you the 1.5, and then go ahead and square it, and it gives you 2.25. So that means I add that to the left, and then also add it to the right. So now, whenever we are factoring this perfect square trinomial, it's going to be x plus, now all you have to do is either take the square root of 2.25, or take the 3 and divide it by 2. It might be easier to take that 3 and divide it by 2. We know that it's 1.5. And then 1 plus 2.25 gives us 3.25. So now we want to get rid of that square. We do that by square rooting. What you do to one side, you got to do the other. So now that gives us x plus 1.5 equals, take that square root of 3.25, and we get a decimal answer. So we're going to go ahead and put the plus minus on there, and we're going to round this to the nearest hundredth. So that's going to be 1.80. Okay, because afterwards you get 2, 7, 7, 5, 6, 3, 8. But we're rounding to the nearest hundredth. So now I'm going to subtract. So now we're going to subtract 1.5 from both sides. Those are going to cancel out, and we get x equals. So now remember, you've got two problems here. We've got a positive 1.8 minus 1.5, and we've got a negative 1.8 minus 1.5. So let's go ahead and do the positive first. 1.8 minus 1.5, and that gives us 0.3. And then the other one, that's going to be a negative 1.8 minus 1.5, and that gives us negative 3.3. Okay, so now we can put our answers in the braces. It doesn't matter which order you put them in. And there are your solutions. Okay, let's take a look at another example. Example 3. Okay, so remember, the first thing we want to do is get rid of that c value. So we're going to subtract 3 on both sides. That gives me x squared minus 11x equals 2. Don't forget to put the plus blank there and the plus blank over here. Now take that negative 11. Remember, we take the b, divide it by 2, and then square it. So negative 11 divided by 2 gives us that 5.5, or negative 5.5, square it, and that gives us 30.25. So I'm going to add 30.25 over here and add 30.25 over here. Okay, so now we're going to factor that left side. So that's going to be x minus, either take the square root of 30.25 or take that b value and divide it by 2. And that gives us 5.5 squared. And then we add the right side, that gives us 32.25. Now we take the square root of both sides. That gives us x minus 5.5 equals, and now go ahead into your calculator, and that gives us, take the square root of 32.25, that gives us 5.6789, but we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. Don't forget the plus minus, so it's going to give us 5.68. Add 5.5 to both sides. And that gives us x equals, take the positive 5.68 and add 5.5 to it. And that gives us 11.25. 0.18. Now let's do the negative. So negative 5.68 plus 5.5. And that gives us negative 0.18. Write your answers in the braces. Doesn't matter which order it goes in. And there's your two solutions. All right, let's try one more example. Example 4 here. Okay, now on this one, they already have the C value over to the right side. But notice on this one, we have an A value here. And our A value is negative 2. Now, if you notice on example 1, example 2, and example 3, our A values were all 1. And that's what we want our A value to be, is to be a positive 1. So that means we need to get rid of this negative 2. So to get rid of it, notice the negative 2 is multiplying to the x squared. To get rid of it and to make it 1, we need to divide each term by negative 2. So these are going to cancel out. We're left with x squared minus 5x equals 7. And then I'm going to go ahead and put that plus value over here and the plus value over here. So now take that b value, divide it by 2, and square it. So 5 divided by 2 gives us 2.5. Square it, that gives us 6.25. So we're going to add 6.25 over here and add 6.25 over here. So now let's go ahead and factor this. That gives us x minus, and take your b value, divide it by 2, or take the square root of 6.25. It doesn't matter which one. We get 2.5 squared equals, and then add those two together, 7 plus the 6.25, and that gives us 13.25. Take the square root, both sides, so that we can get rid of that square. And that gives us x minus 2.5 equals, don't forget the plus minus. And now let's go ahead and take the square root of 13.25. We're going to round this to the nearest hundredth, and that gives us 3.64. Now, add the 2.5 to both sides. Those are going to cancel out. You get x equals, now notice here we've got two problems. Do the positive, 3.64 plus 2.5, and that gives us 6.14. And now let's do the negative, negative 3.64 plus 2.5, and that gives us negative 1.14. So now notice on these problems where we get the decimal answers, those are ones that you could not solve by factoring. You would have to complete the square. So understand that if you got whole numbers for your solutions, you could have solved it by factoring. But on all the ones where we've got decimal solutions, that had to be done by completing the square. Okay, so it's very important that we know this way of solving, because not every single problem that you solve is going to be nice whole numbers. So understand that if you get decimal answers, that means that problem could not have been factored and you would have to complete the square. All right, that's it for our notes. If you've got any questions, please let me know.